If you had a number of the amount of downforce that this car could generate, say on a low downforce circuit like Monza, for example, how much of that would be generated by the car and how much by the rear wing? I know the front wing.
Well, it's going to be quite interesting. You can, I mean, this question obviously came up over the 2021 Monza weekend. How small can they go? And certainly, if you can get the underfloor working really well, you can really start to downsize your rear wing. But still remembering that rear wing has a job to do, not just for creating its own downforce. Even under the current regulations, it demands you have 2-element rear wing there, and there is a limit on the minimum size between them as well. So there'll always be something there, and I don't think any team, even under these regulations, will be ready to run no rear wing. It's not like it was back in the 80s.
No, of course not. But how much scope, what is the range of downforce you can run on the rear wing from maximum Monaco to Monza? What is it, the same more or less as 21?
It's going to be trickier to upsize the wing to create much more downforce than the geometry. Again, you're working in a very restricted area and you're losing that upper part of end plate, which really helps to get the rear wing working, again, to try and reduce the wake that the rear wing creates.
So that's another area that'll be frustrating for Adrian Newey.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah. So Scarbs, the big question, of course, is how the teams are approaching this and how much variation you think there's going to be. I mean, you've talked about the building blocks for the front-running teams, but first of all, let's talk about time frame. When do you think a car is going to be on the road?
I think the teams are going to want to, well, it really depends on the testing plan for the new year, which I'm not entirely clear of at this stage. No team will be in a rush to get the car out very early because they can't track test it other than a limited amount of testing days, and that will be with promotional tyres, not with the proper tyres, which means the only real benefit you would get from testing early will be to test the tyres. So that kind of rules that out. I think most teams will have a very early specification of car and particularly bodywork ready for that first test, maybe with some filming days ahead of that. But the cars are going to develop rapidly, and we will see through testing lots of new ideas being tested by the time we get to the first race, wherever that may be in the complicated world we currently live within. You will see big upgrade packages, and again, within the budget constraints and within how the teams are developing, you will see lots of updates to the cars, particularly as everyone starts to see what everyone else has come up with to either find there's a better idea out there, or if simply someone is just creating a lot more performance out of the car than they've been able to do. So it's going to be a really fast-paced season as we kick off next year.
And you've talked about wheelbase. Is the overall length smaller as well?
It's about the same. The nose is, I think, a touch longer, and the rear is a touch shorter. But in terms of length, you know, by and large, the cars are going to look very similar to they are now. I mean,
so they're still big racing cars?
These are still physically very big racing cars, about 5.6 metres long, 3.6 metre wheelbase, lots of overhang, and potentially...
Still impossible around Monaco?
Well, you say that. I mean, I have a different opinion about, you know, problems at Monaco with long cars. There's, you know, buses go around the hairpin at Monaco every day of the week, and they're quite long wheelbase.
Yeah, true.
It's a case of how much you're able to steer.
I was thinking more about the overtaking thing. It isn't going to obviously be an issue there.
I don't think it's an issue. I think the length of the car isn't that important in terms of overtaking. And the width of the car has been consistent, apart from that period where they did go to 1.8 metre cars in width for a short period in the 2000s. But previous to that, cars were 2 metres and we never used to have an issue. The problem is the aerodynamics. That's what stops you overtaking, because the car in front is producing turbulence in the wrong area, and your car is trying to create downforce exactly in the areas that are sensitive to the turbulence of the car ahead.
When the model was initially launched in Austin last year, I asked Ross Brawn about why they continued with the same basic brake system, carbon brakes, and whether they looked at lengthening the period in which you braked, in other words, to help overtaking. And he actually said, no, the shorter the distance, the more chance for overtaking, which I found to be quite difficult to understand, I have to say. But there is no change really in that respect, is it? They're still going to stop on a sixpence, these cars. They're still going to very, very short braking areas compared with, say, an Indy car. Yeah,
I mean, the factors that make a Formula One car stop in such a short distance is primarily downforce, allied to the grip from the tyres, and then the performance of the brakes themselves. The brakes will change for 2022. No longer will it be a spec braking system, which was one of the original plans, but Brembo, or the Brembo group, will effectively supply the entire grid. The brake disc is going to get a little bit larger in diameter.
So, sorry, Scarbs, just to stop you there, just to clarify that point. Brembo will be the brake supplier, but it's not a uniform brake. It's not the same brake.
It's not
for
a spec
anymore.
braking system.
Right, okay.
Brembo are completely at liberty, or any other manufacturer, should they be in the sport, to make customised versions within the specifications that are set out in the regulations. Now, we do have a bigger disc, and the bigger disc that we'll have, it's only slightly larger, will have a small increase in brake torque, so it should potentially give you slightly better braking. But that then is offset by some regulations that limit the number of holes and also the diameter of the holes that go around the disc, which will compromise its cooling slightly. So you may have slightly more power, but you may not be able to exploit it in the same way that you currently do. Equally, the inner brake duct around these brakes is also part of this prescribed design, like the tyre fin and the brake duct fins.
Why wouldn't they have gone, for example, to cast iron brakes, just to give you a massive 300-yard braking area?
The reason, I mean, we could go to cast iron discs. It potentially would be cheaper, but it would have no impact other than the extra weight of them, and but yeah, as I say, the
But
cheaper.
the impact would be a much longer braking area.
It
so
wouldn't,
in theory,
because they have tested cast iron discs or metal discs, shall we say, against carbon, and the stopping power, as I say, is in the downforce and in the tire, the grip of the tyre.
Okay.
The torque, the braking torque from the brakes doesn't vary massively between the two types. In fact, you're more likely to get less reliable braking from a metal disc than you do what we currently get from the carbon fibre discs.
Okay, to sum up then, you're a driver that's obviously quick in a current car. When you're in the new car and it's kind of being developed and you've got some sort of balance, how is it going to feel different in terms of where the downforce is, steering load, brake load? What's it going to feel like for the drivers?
Well, the drivers will potentially have slightly less downforce, slightly less drag. I think
So higher top speeds then?
Higher top speeds, potentially slightly lower cornering speeds. I think the biggest difference for the drivers is going to be in the feel of the tyres. Having run for so long in junior categories with 13-inch tyres and these big 13-inch wheels and big balloon tyres, suddenly going to a very stiff tyre setup is really going to affect, you know, that corner entry, how the car performs under traction out of the corners. And I think some drivers will adapt better than others, and I think a few drivers could really struggle with this setup. We've seen lots of testing, and I've not heard any real complaints at this stage, but I think when we get down to the nitty-gritty at the start of 2022, there will be, you know, a difference in feel for the drivers.
And a more intensive gym program, workout routine for the mechanics, because those wheels are going to be heavier, right?
Yes,
For
I
the pit
mean,
stops.
sadly, the car is getting heavier, and part of that additional weight comes from bigger forged magnesium wheels and bigger
So
tyres.
big job, those pit stops, big job now that.
Yeah, the only the benefit is they don't have to bend over quite so far because the tyres are slightly taller, but I don't know if that will pay itself off. So yeah, pit stops will be tricky. You will have not only a bigger, heavier tyre, but you'll have that wheel fairing, so finding something to grip hold of could be an issue. And then you've got to take the tyre off around that tyre fairing, that fin that goes over the top. So it will take some practice, and we could have some fumbles through the year as the teams just get drilled into being used to this setup.